Hey Ryan,
Hey, Linda.
how are you?
I was just thinking about how great this conference we went to last month was. Lost
Yeah, I
Tech
know. We
Forward.
had a lot of fun, didn't we?
We throw a good party over at Tech.
We
Sometimes we
threw a
tell
good.
people about stuff too, and that might be more important. But Nashville was a pretty good spot for Tech Forward this year. Learned a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Nashville's always a great time. It's always a
Amazing
great
how all
time.
these conferences have good music.
Yeah,
Shocking.
yeah,
Every
absolutely. Well, you know, you and I think are sometimes I feel like we're a little jaded because we deal with technology every day, right, of our lives, and we work in it, and we're all like really, I don't know, into the details of stuff so much. And then when I go to these conferences, I'm surprised at how much I learned. Well, I'm not really surprised at how much I learned, but I learned a lot this year.
Yeah, there were just a lot of people who are really thinking about how to use tech in their
Mhm.
world, for their
Yeah.
nonprofits, for their communities. And they all brought these really interesting perspectives in how they were doing that. Certainly, a lot of them, big conversation of the conference this time was certainly AI, artificial intelligence,
Yep.
rise, big shock for everybody. But there were a lot of other ways people were thinking about it too, just in terms of how they can bolster what their organization's doing, meet their missions more effectively. And like that's really cool to see. There were a lot of really interesting people doing really interesting work.
Yeah, really, really great stuff. Every Town for Gun Safety. What a great presentation that guy had. But here's what I learned. Speaking of AI, I think what I learned, and I know it's probably like people are probably like, you learned that? I did learn that. The difference between generative AI and agentic AI. It's the new fancy term now, right? Agentic AI.
Generative AI can create content, research ideas, answer questions, and even write code. Its results depend on your input, and the output varies depending on the tool you use, like ChatGPT, Claude, or Copilot, and its version. Each time you use it, you'll need to provide a prompt to guide the output. Agentic AI builds on generative AI by not only creating content, but also taking action, completing tasks, operating independently, and even coordinating with other agents. Agents are created or programmed, then scheduled or triggered to run.
You sound smarter every time you say it.
Every time I say it, I sound smart. That's right. Right. So I don't know, generative AI has been around. It seems like it's been around forever now, right? ChatGPT and Copilot and Claude and all of those tools that I still frankly fumble through because I didn't realize that, because I think I fell for this talk that you guys give me about how it's a natural language model, right? And it's not like, let's be clear, it's not like Linda Philadelphia accent natural language tool. You still have to talk to it and give it prompts in some format, some better format, right? To get the best response.
Yeah, so I mean, one, crazy to say, I don't know exactly the date we're going to post this, but it's been 3 years since ChatGPT launched. And while some of this tech existed in small ways before that, like that's the moment, right, where all of this exploded. And I think one of the most interesting learnings over that time goes back to what you said. It's how can I get the most out of these tools? And I can talk to it like a friend in a natural language kind of way, Linda
Mhm.
from Delco. Um,
Linda from Delco.
I'm actually officially going to change my chat GPT to only talk to me in that way. I'll leave Copilot a little more
That
professional.
would be great, right?
Be the best Copilot I've ever had in my whole life.
Best co-pilot.
But like if you're in a work setting, if you're in a nonprofit setting, like you want to be able to get the most out of these tools, even if they're free or even if you're paying for it, whichever way you're doing it. And writing really effective prompts is the single best way that a nonprofit can do that. And it's not exactly coding, but you do have to think in a lucid way that makes it easy for the GPT to understand what you want in the
Yeah,
best way possible. And
right.
it's an art and a science all at the same time.
It is. It is. And so since the conference, I've been doing a ton of work through ChatGPT and getting way better results because of the things that I learned at the conference about prompting and about like, yeah, you can kind of ask it a question, but if you frame that question in a really good way, you'll get a much better output from the tool, right?
What are some of the things that you found, like best practices, a couple of your favorites that have made it easier for you to get good prompts?
Um, One of the things is telling, in the prompt saying things like, you are a consultant working with a nonprofit organization that has these right? So I guess we call that role and goal, right? Setting the role and goal, um, then giving it specific context of like, so my prompts used to be this big and now they're like this big, right? And I say to myself, why don't I just write the darn paper? Well, because it's going to go out onto the internet and do all my research for me, right? And bring me back the things that I've asked it to, or it's going to reference a particular document in our SharePoint to help me get that thing back. And then, so I think the front of it being specific in the middle, but then telling it what really you want the output to be, right? Make an Excel document that has these columns and, like very specifically telling it what you want the output to be. It has been a game changer for me.
To get the most from generative and agentic AI, success depends on strong prompting and careful verification of results. Garbage in, garbage out still applies. These tools don't fully grasp human nuance, so clear, structured prompts work best.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with this, now speaking to the audience, like this idea of prompt engineering is like really, really powerful. And it's the people who are getting the most out of their tools are using some of these techniques. Roll and goal is one of the best ones, giving it some explicit directions, like really treating it like an intern that you have to go teach it how to do things, and being thoughtful about how to do it is really important. But the other thing I heard you say is like the more context you give matters a lot. And just to introduce some more vocabulary, the new rage is context engineering. So it's how do I make sure that the GPT that I'm working with has the right information at the right time? And how do I augment what I'm giving it outside of the prompt too? So that's like other really interesting things that people are thinking about to make this technology that's already helpful a little bit more helpful than it even currently is. So big, important step.
Yeah, I think the next thing about the using generative AI to your advantage that I found was you and I did a jam day with the OpenAI
Oh yeah,
folks.
awesome day.
It was an awesome day, and part of that was me learning that the different models that they have will produce different outputs as well. So I could take that same well-formed prompt that I now know how to write, kind of, right? And I can take it and put it into ChatGPT 5, get an output, ChatGPT 4.0, get a different output, and say Claude, different output, Copilot, different output. So I'm using the same prompt and the same words in that prompt. I'm getting a little bit different output. And I think that's because of the way the models are written. True?
Yeah, definitely. So having a strong understanding of which model you're using is one of the other key things you can do to get better at using a tool like ChatGPT, right? Right now with ChatGPT, you all might remember we rolled out as if I was part of doing this.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
A big part of it.
Huge.
But we rolled out GPT-5. And the really interesting about GPT-5 is that it's going to do some of that routing for you. So it has a thinking model and it has a smaller model. The name I will remember later.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, do you want this fast or do you want me to think about it? Right.
Exactly. So before they rolled that out, you would have had to pick and know, all right, I need O3 versus I need 4.0. And that can just keeping track of which one, if you're not doing that every day, is tough. But if we expand that out, that is one of the things you can do to get better, is knowing which model to use for the right use case and starting to build some natural understanding of that.
Hmm.
Claude is better at certain types of tasks than Copilot is, than ChatGPT is, than Gemini is. And building out your understanding of those does really make a big difference in terms of the responses that you get back.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so anyway, I feel like after this and you and I've been to a lot of conferences, speaking at the conferences and attending the conferences over the past 2 years. I think this is the first time that I came out and I learned something at conference and I put it into practice and it actually saved me time and gave me a better output.
One other thing that our team has been thinking about, partially from coming out of Tech Forward, is just like, how do we make that easier for our nonprofit partners? Like,
Mhm.
these best practices, we're practiced in the best practices, and people are prompting things every day. So like, what can we be doing to just improve that for our partners? And so we've been working on a tool internally to Tech Impact that we're hoping to roll out pretty shortly. That's just going to make it easier for people, like just a free tool that we'll put out there. So if you're a nonprofit, something that you can share with the other people on your team. And really importantly, the more that tool is used, we're going to be able to refine it so we can make it even better to serve nonprofits even more effectively.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
longer term, a thing we're hoping to do is we'd love to make that true for agents as well. So prompts are the first step, but using what we're learning from people about what they need on the prompting side, that's going to help us build some agents that
Yeah.
can just make easier for people to access. Yeah.
The other thing that was very interesting to me, and we've heard a lot about for the past, I would say, 5 years, is bias.
When prompting generative AI, you must be aware that the dataset is inherently biased. It is your responsibility to tell the tool either use data sources that reduce bias or to tell you that the output contains bias. Always fact check results and compare responses across different GPTs to spot variations and potential bias.
Right? GPTs are biased.
Yep.
And I think and I never really understood or seen a good example of that bias in action until that one woman, Teresa, did her presentation and showed the artwork.
Hmm.
Right? The artwork was, I think, because it was so visual and so obvious that, it was kind of comical how biased the model was. But
Yeah.
that's something that I didn't necessarily come away from the conference with a practical thing that I could do. So, like, what is it that we can do to make sure that we remove most of the bias?
Yeah. Teresa did a great job talking about that. She had some really interesting experiences getting to do that outside of a nonprofit context, but also inside of it as well,
Mhm.
red teaming some of those issues. And it was just a great presentation, great way to kick off day 3 of the conference. Um, Bias is really tricky, and bias is baked into everything we do, right? It isn't necessarily always a bad thing to have a bias, but we all have one. We all have to recognize that we have it. And models definitely have them. If there's bias on the internet, there's going to be bias in your model. And that's just like the way you need to think about it. We trained this on big internet data. There's scary things on the internet. Those scary things might make its way into the model that you're looking at too. It's why I always tell people that these are large language models. They're not large knowledge models. They don't know things. So really, to me, bias is a function, like catching it is a function of building good controls inside of your organization and having some good training for people on your team. The number one thing I always recommend to people is inside of your organization, don't be afraid of the fact that people are using AI. You should embrace it and be comfortable with having people say, hey, I used AI to help me write this. And by doing that, you are able to put on a slightly different lens in how you're reviewing the work. Just to say, like, hey, is this really accurate? Is there bias here? It might be really subtle bias. What can I do to pull those things out of it? And it's just this extra step you have to think about. But if you're treating AI as a 4-letter word and you're not allowed to use it inside of your organization, you're actually setting yourself up for some bad things to happen as
Yeah.
opposed to embracing it in the other way.
Yeah.
That's one major thing.
Is there a way that I can further refine my prompt to tell AI that I might be asking it to do something that that area is inherently filled with biased data and to look through that?
Yeah, you can definitely do things like that. It goes back to that prompt engineering idea. The more context that you're giving the model that you're working with, the more likely you are to get the output that you want to get out of it. And so giving some clear instructions about, hey, ChatGPT, hey, Copilot, hey, Gemini, be thoughtful about this in your response. That does
Mm,
actually help. It's amazing the little things that help. Being polite to it helps.
it
Like
does,
that
yeah.
if you also ask it very nicely to, hey, please be thoughtful about the bias you're using.
Yeah.
That also goes a long way.
Hmm. Cool. Um, I guess the last thing is this understanding of what is an agent and what is agentic AI versus generative AI, right? And I think what I kind of learned is that with generative AI, which we've talked a lot about today, I'm I'm the person who has to call up the tool, whatever the tool is, write it a prompt and put all that stuff together and then hit run. And this is like a smart assistant that's going to go out and do this one thing for me, right? And pull this back, whether it be write an email or a thank you note or go do some research or, you know, get me, write me an article or something like that. I can go ahead and do that. But it's up to me as the human being to have that idea, pull up the tool, write the prompt, get the response, edit it and verify it in some sort of a way. And then that's the one-off thing that I do. Versus agents that are more than that and can like be automated.
Yeah,
Right.
agents build on that, right? So automated is the right word. The second that you start to think to yourself, I'm typing this same prompt in a lot, or I'm typing it in at this same time every day or every week, or I type this in after I do this, like I always intake a person and then I write this prompt to help me parse through the information. That's probably the moment you want to think about an agent. So agentic AI is simply automation with an AI component to it. It's another tool in your automation toolbox. Like in the past, if you're a nonprofit, you might be using tools like Power Automate or Zapier or if this then that to help you with some basic automation. Agents are this other layer you can put on top of it. And I mentioned earlier on that sometimes when you're giving a good prompt, it's kind of like talking to an intern. It's like writing a good technical document. Agents are pretty similar. You have to think about how you give a task to your agent in the same way that you might tell an intern or a new person working for you, someone who's like really competent, but you need to teach them how to do it. That's how you would think about it. The types of tasks I'd look for to do with an agent are ones that traditional automation hasn't always worked for. And the language I use to describe that is traditional automation is really good for deterministic types of tasks. So anything you can use like an if-then statement to make happen. And agents, it's like, what happens if there's too many if-then statements, or you can't enumerate all the if-then statements? There's like all these little things that might influence what the output is supposed to look like. And we have a lot of tasks like that every single day, right?
Mhm.
That's the moment I might think about using an agent to help me do this work. I love some of the examples that we had from Tech Forward. You mentioned Nick Saplina from Everytown, their EveryShot app, like, and they were
Mhm.
using an agent to go gather news sources, classify them, figure out if it was relevant to their EveryShot tool, and then that was making a human's work a lot easier. I think
So this
the
is like logging where gun violence has occurred.
exactly, and
Yeah.
we should definitely like drop a link for EveryShot.
Yeah, we should drop a link
It,
in there.
it is really good. It's an amazing tool, but from a people time perspective, if you had a group of people doing that by hand, you're talking about like tens of hours a week, and that adds up really fast.
Yeah.
And Nick's stat was they have agents running in the background to make this happen, and then it takes one person a couple of hours to verify stuff. So we're
Right.
still keeping a human in the loop, and that's really important for that. But it dramatically increased capacity to meet their mission.
Right.
Loved that example.
The other thing that you and I have been working on is this, what is the cost of the agent, right? Because I think we talked about costs of generative AI licenses. A lot of them are free, and you can just use the free one to say, "Hey, I'm going away to, going away to Martha's Vineyard for the weekend. Write me an itinerary," and it'll do that for us, right? But if we're saying, "Hey, I just had this patient or I just had this client come in and I'm trying to do an intake for them and they've told me all of this, personal information," I don't really want to chat GPT that or
Yeah, exactly.
Gemini that, right? Then I would want to buy a license. And if I buy a license, I can keep that information inside of our little orbit and still get all the benefits of the tool doing some work for us, right? As we're prompting it. But when we turn that into an agent, there's other costs associated with that, like consumption fees.
Exactly. And it's going to depend on the technology you're using specifically, of course,
Mhm.
the type of model you're using in the background, the type of tool you're using to build it. So there's a bunch of considerations, but that consumption cost is something to think about. Now, a lot of these tools, the way that they're set up, I'll use Copilot Studio as an example here. If you're not familiar with it, Copilot Studio is, of course, a service by Microsoft. It's more of a what you see is what you get tool. So it's not a coding-based tool. It's more of a drag and drop tool that you can use. And the way that they've set things up is building it and testing it is free. So anyone who has a Copilot license at your organization is able to go do that. But once you publish it to the organization, every time you use it, you're going to have a consumption cost associated with it. And those costs are normally in the pennies range, but there's a big it depends that I've got to throw on there.
Yeah, right.
How complex is the thing you're doing? How much context is it taking in to make it happen? How many times do you have to call the model every time you're doing the work? There's a lot of variables to think about
Mhm.
there. And so
And,
having a good
and even
estimate.
pennies add up, right?
Exactly.
If you're running a tool like that 10 times a day, those pennies will add up.
Exactly. So being thoughtful about what those consumption costs are and trying to model it out matters. Like thinking about your total cost of ownership is pretty important. So like what's it going to take to build this? Some of these, if you have a tech savvy person at your organization, you can probably jump in and experiment and build something from it. Sometimes they get a little more complex and you might need some help from someone who has some deeper tech skills than that. But it's worth experimenting with for sure. And the other thing to think about is what's the ROI on some of these things? Is it if it takes you 100 hours to save you 5 minutes a month, yeah, that might
Not
not be
worth
worth
it.
it. Not worth it.
Not
So
worth it.
being thoughtful about when to pull the trigger on trying to experiment with this is worth it. Though I'll say you should just experiment to start with. Don't worry too much about ROI up front. The ROI is that you're learning about the tech. And then later on, you can think about the ROI for specific moments to use it in your org.
Anyway, cool. Well, anything else that you learned at Tech Forward that we haven't gone over?
I mean, I was reinforced that Nashville is an amazing city.
Yeah,
So check out Nashville if you haven't gone.
yeah,
But honestly, the biggest thing I learned at Tech Forward is it's really people. And there's just a lot of really cool people in our communities trying to do work that's going to improve the lives of the people around
yeah.
us. And if you want to meet some people who want to do that with tech, Tech Forward is the place you want to be for
Tech
that.
Forward's the place to be.